been I suppose, a mixed year for women, Maggie, with regard to what we've seen from the Supreme Court. And has that changed the landscape at all? Because one of the questions that always comes up, anything with women, of course, is why are you guys still doing a list? Just do most influential people. I mean, how do you think about it? You're Forbes Women editor. Has your mindset shifted this year in terms of how you're thinking about power, just given what's going on in the external environment?
Oh, absolutely. I will confess to feeling conflicted. Here we are editing a list, publishing a list about the world's most powerful women, some of whom gained power within their sphere of influence, in a year where women in the United States lost a right. This is the biggest rollback of women's rights, the repeal of Roe v. Wade, that we've seen in the 2 decades we've been doing this list. I do think it's important to measure power, though, because I think it's important to hold people accountable. So to that end, I published a story this morning as part of the package, looking at how the women on this list are using their voices and acting for reproductive rights. We heard Janet Yellen testify in front of the Senate. She's number 33 on this list. She's the Treasury Secretary. And she said in very plain terms that abortion access and abortion care is an economic issue. It is fundamentally an issue that affects women's earnings and overall wealth creation. And she got critiques for saying that that sounds cold or whatnot. But at the end of the day, the decision about whether or when or with whom to have kids is one of the most personal decisions a person can make, and one of the things that can affect a person's earnings more. I'm stuttering because I'm having trouble thinking of things that can be more impactful to a woman's individual earnings. So that's a long-winded way of saying I understand those who say we should be looking at influence, but I also think it's important to say these are the world's most powerful women. These are the ones who are acting out for and or supporting reproductive rights. And these are the ones who, quite frankly, are not. And to that end, I would point to the new Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. I heard from one source who was like, what the? Why is she on the list? Italy has one of the 10 largest GDPs in the world, according to the World Bank. Meloni's very far right. Her party has a record of abortion restrictions, and I think that makes women concerned. So concerned, in fact, that Italian women poured into the streets after her election in September. So I think this list is a good way of, in some ways, keeping track of who these power players are and what they're doing.
Who are some of the newcomers you'd put on our radar, Maggie?
There are 16 newcomers this year. I think the one that I would want to highlight the most right now is actually a first in list history. We have a posthumous listing. We looked, as always, at the news stories that are affecting all people, but particularly women. And we looked at the women who are marching for their rights in Iran. And we kind of asked ourselves, what's the best way to tell that story through this list? And we decided to list Mahsa Amini, Gina Mahsa Amini. Gina is her Kurdish name. She was killed at the hands of Iran's morality police in September. The Iranian government denied their involvement, but when reports got out about her death and photos, and this was at the hands of 2 female journalists who are now in jail, it erupted. The story erupted. People poured into the streets. Her funeral turned into a protest. And it started as a protest against the Iranian regime's treatment of women. By law, women are treated as second-class citizens in Iran. But gradually, these protests grew. They grew across the world. We saw allies and
I was in Miami for a protest, actually. I saw a big protest down there with her face in all the posters.
Her name has turned into a hashtag that's been used. We cut off the data at November 30th, so I'm sure it's been more since, but as of November 30th, 79 million times the hashtag Mahsa Amini has been used. One of my sources told me, her name, her face, her image has become a symbol for the quest for freedom. And indeed, it's not just women in the streets now, it's men, it's people of all genders, and they are fighting for regime change. They will not stand for small, mealy-mouthed measures. They will not stand for surface-level improvements. They really are protesting for their rights. And it is one of the longest protests we've seen in Iranian history. As of this recording, it's 80 days strong. And I think it surpassed what anyone would have expected at the time. And to an earlier point that I made about we look at media mentions and reach and spheres of influence, we do look at how many times people have been talked about in the press. And Mahsa Amini ranked in the top 10 of all the media mentions for all the women on the list, and the rest of them are living. So we felt that this was merited.
No, very interesting. Great food for thought. And I obviously recommend people check out the list. It always makes me think, and it makes me think about power and how it's changing. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Diane.